Hey everyone. We just wanted to jump out ahead of this episode to discuss our support of the Black Lives Matter movement and denounce the horrific police brutality occurring all over the country. Over the next couple of weeks, the episodes that you're about to listen to were recorded before the death of George Floyd and protesting that took place in response, and we would be remiss to remain silent. This is something we're deeply moved by and wanted to do our part in keeping the focus on what matters.
The heart-rending problem of systemic racism is deeply ingrained in our country, and the struggle for systemic racial equality is fought by so few. Events as horrific as the deaths of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Gardner, Sandra Bland, and most recently the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd have sparked the passion we are seeing sweep the country. This passion is not new, as we recall the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, and now present in the Black Lives Matter movement. Here, we want to collectively throw our support towards the peaceful protesters, the organizers, and everyone leading the charge with the Black Lives Matter movement.
We recognize that our podcast is an escape, and thank you for spending your time with us. However, there are far more important voices that deserve your attention too, so we wanted to share those resources and provide a path to those voices, which will be linked in the show notes.
True justice can only be achieved when individuals act justly. It is with this in mind that we share these resources on why systemic racism continues to persist in the fabric of our society and to learn what we can do to help. It's not enough to not be racist. We have to be actively anti-racist and to do our part to squelch the hate. Every little bit we do will create a path towards a future where we all share the most basic fundamental right of equality and safety.
For future listeners, please consider looking through the resources available so this moment goes beyond a single point in history and transforms to the new norms of racial equality. Thank you for your time and enjoy this week's episode of MCU Need to Know. And welcome back to another episode of MCU Need to Know, a podcast dedicated to the Marvel Cinematic Universe and everything you need to know. I'm Trey.
I'm Jude. How are you doing, Trey?
I am super duper excited for this episode. I think last week I was kind of clear on not being overly fond of the Daredevil episode we watched, and I've come in riding a high from the episode we're about to discuss today.
Awesome.
I'm really excited.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about that towards the end, where the episode overall was kind of that, you mentioned that A-B cadence. But the way it ended left you wanting to know how does he get out of that situation?
But yeah, of course, if this is your first episode of MCU Need to Know and you want to know what we're doing, we have been running through the Netflix Daredevil series as a way to kick this podcast off. Originally, our plan was to launch alongside Black Widow, but obviously, I'm sure I'm not bringing news to anyone with the way that the world has been adapting to COVID and release dates being pushed back. We've shifted our plans and we have decided to take a retroactive viewing of Daredevil. And it's been fun so far.
I would say, actually, something I just saw, I think the UK is getting Black Widow 10 days earlier than the new release date. So it's like October 28th or something.
That's going to make avoiding spoilers real fun.
Yeah, I know.
I know it's hard to coordinate worldwide releases in a normal setting, but I can't imagine how much more difficult it's going to be once we're dealing with everything that could potentially be happening again with COVID.
Yeah, the source that I saw this on talked about how the possibility of like using this as a test run, with what kind of numbers is this going to bring coming back to theaters after all the lockdowns that people have been going through, and what kind of money projections, and then to take that and, project out into other markets.
I mean, the big question has been, can Marvel movies restart the movie industry? And we've talked about it before, how it's so unfair for the character, obviously, Natasha and Scarlett Johansson, how they've deserved their own solo movie for so long, then to have it be pushed back, and now it has this immense pressure on it to restart the movie industry. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how it ultimately plays out across movie audiences.
I feel like this is popular enough that this could do it. I mean, if you try to think about what other movies, Wonder Woman, Notice like the stuff that's coming to mind is not your indie type movies, right? It's the big blockbuster movies that you're going to bring a bigger audience in. So if anything, like these could be the things to do it. Although I think movies will probably have a quicker turnaround to streaming now.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're already seeing that, how different movies are testing different avenues of digital release, whether it be, hey, pay this one-time fee, you owe it forever, or here's this, high premium price to just rent it once. I think Trolls, you had to pay like $20 to rent it for 48 hours, and then there was some movie with Vin Diesel. I can't even remember the name. It was a cheesy action movie.
It was Bloodshot. Our cousin Robert introduced me to that comic, Valiant Comics.
Yeah, I paid the price, but I get to like own it forever. Like it wasn't just a rental thing. So studios are definitely playing around with different formulas.
Okay, when we're done with this recording, you're gonna have to tell me if you liked it, because that's something I collected Bloodshot comics when I was in middle school. So I was curious of how that movie turned out.
Did you like the comics?
I did enjoy those comics.
Either way it shakes out, we are here to discuss Season 1, Episode 6 of Daredevil, titled Condemned. So, let's go ahead and jump into that. Immediately, we pick up where we last left off in the previous episode, where Daredevil is cornered by the police officers. It's a very tense scene where Daredevil is slowly lowering himself to the ground and allowing himself to be apprehended. And then, of course, once Daredevil realizes that these are cops that are on Fisk's payroll, he springs into action and is able to subdue them so that him and Vladimir can get away.
I liked how they started with the slow-mo, because we talked about in various ways. You mentioned that Daredevil was in his anger, right? So he didn't catch the cops coming, and that's how he got caught. I mentioned he's in this whole letting the devil out. So I liked how they did that slow-mo, because it was almost like slowly bringing us as an audience back to that place and reacquainting us with what was happening, and kind of bringing Daredevil out of that moment and back to his own senses.
Because they always describe, like, it's a blinding rage. Like you don't pick up on anything else, and have that disorienting effect of having his voice distorted and saying, I think he said something like hands up, and then back to reality. Like you said, that was very effective. So honestly, the thing that I really like about this episode is because of the way that it plays out, where, Matt feels cornered. We learn that these are cops that are on Fisk's payroll, and we're going to see in this episode just how far Fisk's reach is throughout his various ways that he can control the city that he lives in to make this a difficult time for Matt. And just setting it up with here and the cops, it was like watching the cat and mouse game just be put into action. To me, it was a great intro.
Yeah, I did find it interesting that again, creative choices. They did Did we honestly expect him to not fight his way out if they weren't dirty cops?
Yeah, I mean, what was the plan there? Like, it had to happen, but
yeah, so I just wasn't sure what he was waiting on to put the cuffs on.
Because I was thinking, I'm glad you brought that up. I forgot that I kind of like mulled this over briefly while I was watching this episode. You can make the argument that he feels cornered and there's nowhere to go because they have guns pointed in his direction. But peeking ahead a little bit, and towards the end of this episode, we see where people with larger guns are pointing at him, and that hasn't stopped him before. So what was it that stopped him here?
Yeah. Now, I mean, it was good choreography with the fight, and he was handcuffed and, displaying the athleticism and all of that stuff. Great. Like, I'm not going to complain about that. But I'm just trying to figure out, like, what he was listening for, what he was doing, because the way it was shot, he didn't really react until he realized they were dirty. And my thought was, you're fighting yourself, you're fighting your way out anyways. And I do want to say Sergey met his end here. And the only reason why I'm bringing that up, first, I don't know why last episode it was so hard for me to say Sergey. In the late 90s,
hey, I'm not even sure I said Simon right in a couple episodes back. So,
well, in the late 90s, I remember watching the Dallas Stars, and one of their defensemen was Sergey Zubov. Like, I know how to say it. I just couldn't.
Hey, look, if we do this long enough, I think we're all going to run into words that give us trouble. I'm still haunted by me not being able to say choreography in episode 1.
So we start with a shot directly at Ben. And what we see is he's building his crime board and kind of putting together all the details he has from that previous Union Allied case. At this point, he experiences the explosion. So it's a slight flashback here. And then as a press room, there's some chaos. I can't remember his editor's name, but his editor starts barking out orders. And then Ben asks for locations and recognizes those as Russian controlled and knew immediately that this was not a natural disaster.
Right, which is really keen of him to pick up on and rush off. A great way to show how capable of a character he is. I think one of the things that I immediately liked about this scene was, I mean, we've seen hundreds of like vision boards in crime shows where people are trying to like piece together like how everything's connected.
Mm-hmm.
I really like the simple use of the playing cards here to kind of represent, you know, like the king with the question mark and the Joker. Like, it was such a quick visual mechanic, and we get to see everything Ben knows without him having to say a word. And it just it creates this imagery of him being a very pensive and smart person.
Right. And one of the notes I jotted down was that he had Vladimir and Anatoly as jacks, which is, you know, if you play cards, a high value card, but the lowest of the face cards. So even there, he kind of, at least with those two, and clearly a king for the person on top. You know, I mean, I like that use. I don't know if I've ever seen it done in a show before like that.
Right. I was kind of wanted to say that, but I couldn't think of enough examples to like back that up, but it feels unique. Another note that I had though, that I want to bring up here, the fact that I called it a Joker and you corrected that it was a Jack. I wish I knew cards better. So that I can appreciate. There's so many times in film and TV where the playing cards is like used to represent how the story's going, and because I don't know cards that well, like it's always lost on me.
I honestly thought I just missed seeing the Joker when you said that.
Yeah, I need to just sit down and learn how to play cards so I can appreciate movies.
You know what? Last Thanksgiving? 2 Thanksgivings ago, I taught my kids, and my now 4th grader, so I guess 2nd grader at the time, beat us at Thanksgiving.
Oh, that's awesome. But back to the scene here, I think another one of the things that I loved about this is, you know, we talked about it in episode 1, how that end of the episode roundtable with the different Union Allied factions having their meeting grounded this corner of the universe in a way that made it feel really believable. The fact that the explosion we felt last episode wasn't just a set piece grand spectacle, and we get to see the way that it was affecting everything in this episode made everything feel grounded. Like seeing the editor start like listing off like, hey, you know, call gas and electric, see if they know what's going on, go here and do this. Like, it made it feel believable to me.
Right. And honestly, I don't think we ever saw a big explosion. I mean, Well, I mean, I'm going back to the previous episode, right? Because timeline-wise, you know, Ben here is experiencing that explosion in terms of not being a big spectacle set piece. We saw it from Fisk and Vanessa through the window, and we saw the human shield with Daredevil, and we saw Karen and Foggy, the windows being blown out. But it wasn't, like, when you say big spectacle, I'm thinking Michael Bay or the hospital coming down in The Dark Knight. In this beginning episode, kind of getting Ben's character caught up, and the end of last episode, I don't think we got that. Which to me shows kind of, I mean, I'm sure there's some like money constraints being a Netflix show. And I think that just shows a really good creativity of having that kind of scale without having to show it in that way.
After this scene, we are joined with Wesley and Fisk, who is finding out about the fact that Vladimir is on the run and he is accompanied by the man in the black mask. Fisk is very concerned because he feels like he's betrayed Gal's trust.
Yes, which I found that interesting because we have, trying to remember, was it Cutman? Mainly the first time we saw Fisk with the group, and you mentioned how they were kind of equals, and I mentioned, you know, it felt like Fisk still had kind of control here. But here, it doesn't feel like they're equals or Fisk has control. He seems worried that Gal's going to back out or Gal might turn on him, which is interesting. I mean, he's the big bad, and so you kind of expect him to be the one that's feared.
But I mean, we get to see that flipped on its head because we see how much he values her opinion and trust. And the way that I read it is less that he's afraid of her and more so that like he just genuinely doesn't want to upset her. The way that he mentioned the line, "It's impossible to lie to that woman." Mm-hmm. There was something, and I don't know if this is weird, but it was almost like affection in a way of friendship, if that makes sense. Like that's how I kind of read the scene a little bit.
I can see that. Yeah, I can see that. You know, well, because I mean, that other time I mentioned, the first time we saw them all together, he did offer, you know, and I don't know if I took it as kind of playful banter between two characters at the time, but you know, he offered, you know, Mr. Fisk would like to walk you. He hands her arm. She responds through Wesley, you know, what are you playing at? What are you trying to get? You know, and he has seemed to favor Gal over any of the others.
Another thing that I liked in this scene is kind of playing off the comment I had in the opener where we're seeing the start of this cat and mouse game between Fisk and Matt, because Matt obviously is on the run and Fisk is flexing all his various connections to kind of make trouble for Matt. I really like the way this scene transitions to the next with Wesley saying like, well, what are we going to do? And Fisk says, let the cops do their job. That's what I'm paying them for, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And to me, that mm-hmm. It felt like such a cocky flex on Fisk's part, mm-hmm. and I liked it.
Yeah, no, I liked half of it. Well, I liked the let them do their jobs. The second line, that's what I'm paying them for, to me was unnecessary. Like we know, you know, yeah. You know what I mean? Like it's another one of those where it felt like why are you trying to spell this out for me? By this point, we've seen Blake murder somebody by the mention of your name. It just seemed like an extra line that wasn't needed. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense. I mean,
no, that makes complete sense.
Yeah. And I mean, even going to that next scene, Blake and Hoffman show up to one of the Russian bomb sites, right? And they're starting to basically look for survivors, I use the term survivors loosely for what they're doing. But you know, they're checking out what's going on. And it's so funny in the little scene descriptions you write, you say they interrogate somebody. In my note, I say they torture somebody for information. You know,
I guess I'm taking too much of a neutral stance in these scene descriptions.
Well, and then after, I mean, he tortures, I mean, he's stepping on that big concrete cinder block that's on his leg, forcing information out of this guy. And then he shoots him in the head and yells out, if you find anyone else alive, shoot him. Like he yells it out clearly. So he has no fear of the other cops. Right.
Right.
And so I felt like if he would have just said, let the police do their job, then you go into that scene and hear Blake yell that has a bigger impact. Like you're comfortable yelling that out than when you don't have that line.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. Because I mean, almost like I was complaining about last episode and that scene between Wesley and Turk, where I felt like they were patting themselves on the back by having Turk explain like, man, I really respect a clever move or something like that. I totally see what you mean about that second part of the line being like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too.
Yeah. Well, and to me, I think when Blake yells that in the warehouse, that gives you a really good sense of scale that he's comfortable yelling that out to everybody. Mm-hmm. You know,
no fear of repercussions whatsoever.
Oh yeah. You know, and to me that would have had an even bigger impact without that second line.
I think you might have won me over a little bit on that. I still like it, but I see your point as well. After those scenes where we see Hoffman and Blake torture the Russian criminal for information, we are joined again with Matt, who's running away with Vladimir hoisted on his back. Police sirens and helicopters can be heard all around. And eventually Matt finds an abandoned warehouse where they hole up for a bit to try and figure out what's going on between the two.
I really liked it. Well, I mean, the conversation in this scene is one they pull throughout the rest of the movie. And it's something we've been dancing around. Does he have a no-kill rule? The letting the devil out? What is his end game? And Vladimir starts to just ask him questions directly. I think the quote is, Matt says, "You've got the wrong guy. I don't kill people, not even scumbags like you who deserve it." And then Vladimir points out, "Hey, you dropped somebody off a roof."
Yeah.
Then his response, "Yeah, but he's still breathing, wasn't he?" And I'm like, my thought was you dropped him off the roof. You had no way of knowing really what was going to happen when he hit the concrete.
And I mean, we talked about it too. If it weren't for Claire stopping and asking him, "Hey, what about him?" he never would have checked to see that he was still breathing. So it's like he's almost retroactively trying to justify what he did.
Yes.
No, I mean, to me, honestly, like you said, we've been tracking this no death rule all season, and it's being openly debated on screen. And I think the reason I found this episode powerful, it starts here. Like, we're seeing, obviously with Matt and Vladimir, but to me, what's going on a larger scale is that we're seeing both Matt and Fisk ideologies at play here, with Vladimir as their test subject.
Oh yeah.
And it's very reminiscent of that scene in The Dark Knight with the Joker dilemma between the two boats and having the button to blow up the other.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't know. I like that. It's such a simple concept of what this episode is on the surface, but the way that they get to explore this no death code theme throughout the episode just made me fall in love with it.
Yeah. And I liked the awareness of the showrunners that, hey, we're going to dedicate a whole episode to this.
It speaks to what you talked about, how with long form storytelling, you can take the time to pump the brakes a little bit and really dive into a point. And they're definitely taking the time to dive into a point with this episode.
Yes, very much.
So after Matt and Vladimir's back and forth, we eventually arrive at the hospital where Foggy and Karen have walked in Mrs. Cardenas, who is very clearly injured. They're shouting for help when Claire arrives and immediately takes Mrs. Cardenas as her patients. While Karen and Foggy find out about the explosions on the news, they try and check in on Matt, but obviously he's not answering, and they discover that Foggy has been badly injured.
Yeah, this was a quick scene. I'll be honest, I don't have much notes on it. But I liked that they chose to injure Foggy. Like
I see why you paused there for a second. Look, man, I know he doesn't have your favorite scenes, but come on.
Well, I mean, because I keep thinking about and bringing up the internal struggle about Matt in Daredevil is a question of justice. What's the best way to serve justice? We have the backstory that they gave us through the flashbacks, but it, for me, never felt like the Batman tale of my parents are dead, I'm going to go exact revenge and fix the city in this way so this never happens again. Right? For me, it feels like an internal struggle about what is the best way to serve justice. And Foggy, as a part of that, jumping into action like he did last episode, I just liked that he wasn't impervious to getting hurt.
There was actual consequences to what he was doing, so it makes that willingness to jump into action that much more heroic on his part.
Yes.
Like you said, I really didn't get too many notes here on this scene as well. The thing I liked about it is that it's very similar to the earlier scene where all the reporters were gathering information. It's grounding the universe because we're seeing this convergence of characters and how the single event brought them all together. So obviously you have Foggy, Karen, and Cardenas. Then Claire comes in, and then it carries on with the hospital administrator that I can't remember if we ever figured out her name, but she starts coming into the scene as well. So you're seeing all the various storylines we've been following and the ripple effects of that explosion.
Shirley is the character name. Suzanne H. Smart is the actress.
Thank you. Susie?
Suzanne is for...
Suzanne. I'm already nicknaming her. I feel comfortable nicknaming her.
And that's the actress name. The character name is Shirley.
Shirley. Got it. Okay. Good to know. But yeah, it's just like I like that we're seeing a convergence here.
Yes.
So after that quick check-in with Foggy and Karen, we see that Claire gets a phone call from Matt, and she immediately hides out in the stairwell to have a conversation with Matt. Matt informs her that he needs to stabilize a body that's been shot, but he doesn't feel comfortable asking her without first telling her who it is. And once he reveals that it's Vladimir, she's obviously very apprehensive.
I liked the beginning where, because shows do this, right? Or I don't know if they always do this, and I don't know when this trend happened, but they use that line, this isn't the movies, or it's not as easy as the movies, to kind of establish that they're realism, but then go on to do unrealistic things. But I liked the use of it here because Matt's blind. And so you're able to get a little bit of, I think, humor that worked, given the situation. Like, I don't think it was out of place. And I wanted to ask you, do you think he was right in telling her who it was? Like, because he didn't have to.
I think he is right. I know it's not practical, because if we live in a universe where she didn't help him, in which she would have been justifiable in not wanting to after everything that she's done, after everything that he's done to her, but it still has to be Claire's call, because
I can tell you, like, I'm glad that he told her and gave her the choice. Honestly, in the moment, I could see the choice going the other direction. As storytellers, you might have to deal with that ramification, of not asking the question or telling her. But there, you could have gone either way, and I don't think I would have questioned it as a viewer.
The reason that I kind of trailed off there is I was skimming my notes, because one of the notes I took, I can kind of like fit into the way that you've asked me this question. Last week I complained about how it felt like we didn't see characters make a lot of choices in that last episode. It was just a lot of like stuff that happened.
Yeah.
I really like that we get to see Claire make this choice here. I mean, it's just good storytelling. And, watching Claire wrestle with knowing that Matt needs Vladimir alive for a good reason, but also knowing that he's responsible for this trauma, we get to see like a proving ground, I guess. I keep coming back to that phrase. We get to see that proving ground for Claire. And I think that just works on a narrative level for us.
Yes. Yeah.
The only other note that I have for this scene is I'm glad that they took the time last episode to really dive in and describe how Matt's powers work, because we have that scene where Claire is directing him to find various different things to help cauterize the wound for Vladimir. And the way that he surveyed that warehouse, even for a superhero show, felt like a bit of a stretch. So I thought it was good that they took that time last episode for this particular moment.
You know what I find funny about that is every time I go walking through my house with the lights off and things are in place, you'd think I'd be able to do it, and I can't.
I completely feel that. Because I work in lawn service, and we have a warehouse where we store all our equipment. And to get to the light switch, I have to walk in the dark for a bit. And if just one little thing out of place, and I am immediately stumbling on the ground.
Yeah, and there's the way he surveyed. Oh, there's 2 flares. You know what? I call shenanigans. He made one mistake. That was in a rusty toolbox, not a roadside kit.
Good catch. We're gonna have to total that for Daredevil's report card by the end of the season.
Yes.
So after Matt cauterizes Vladimir's wounds, we find ourselves with a patrol officer on the trail of Matt and Vladimir, discovering where they are due to Vladimir screaming. He tries his best to apprehend Daredevil, but of course we know that can't be done. And after Matt subdues him, he begins questioning whether or not he is part of Fisk's payroll.
Yes. You know what? I had a note here that was more of a question for you. Was the cop's choice to not do as Daredevil/Matt asked brave or stupid?
It's stupid because we know who Matt is. But it's nice narrative irony here that in this battle between the idealist and the realist, we see this brand new officer who makes matters worse because he's doing things the right way. But clearly we know that Matt is the good guy here, and this poor guy has no idea the problems he just created.
Yes. Yeah. I felt bad for the guy, you know?
Yeah.
And honestly, if I'm the young cop and you think, you know, logic, reason or whatever, he doesn't have good reason to trust the man in the mask.
Mm-hmm.
That
he's too new.
Yeah. I mean, he's too new. But his honestly, his probably best way to maybe get out, or to have the man in the mask to ever get caught is to do what he did.
And I don't even think it was out of self-preservation. Like the way that he screams, you know, here's the location, man in the black mask with perp, and then Daredevil knocks him out. Like, I think he genuinely was upholding his oath to try and bring this guy in. I don't even think it was like him thinking, okay, this is my best way out.
Right.
It's just, nice narrative irony that Matt's obviously someone with strong convictions about doing the right thing, and this guy, you know what, it almost, we keep making comparisons to Batman. It reminds me of that scene where the civilians also dress up, and it's like, hey, how come we can't do what you do? And Batman's like, I'm not wearing hockey pads. Like, it has that same energy.
Right. Yeah. Trey's Batman voice. Yeah, but it does. You're right. It has that same feel.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that I like is you once brought up this idea about the way this show has kind of treated leveling up the threats like a video game. Mm-hmm. Within the context of this episode, it has a very similar feel, because we see how this rookie patrol officer stumbles onto Matt's location, and it sets our pace. Like, it's creating this nice ramp of difficulty that we see play out as the episode continues.
Right. You know, I have a note here that says hearing Blake's voice is important. And I forgot why I put that note. When he called it in, was it Blake? I think it was Blake's voice that answered it, right?
Right.
Okay. And so that's why I put that down, because knowing what just happened with Blake earlier, to have Blake to be the first one to respond, to me was a nice touch and important, because it kind of let us know that Fisk was in control.
Yeah. It's almost like a feeling of suffocation. Like, there's so many times where these characters are reaching out to try and do things the right way, and each time Fisk is there to squash it.
Right. And
it's a feeling of hopelessness.
Yeah, and they did a really good job of having that feeling, of putting him in that warehouse and having that feeling like it was closing in on him. Because
very much so.
I mean, until that moment, you don't know if that's a clean or dirty cop. You know, I mean, you ask the question and you're trusting Daredevil's ability to read hearts and tell the truth, whether or not he's clean or dirty.
So in the next scene, we're seeing various police officers arrive. Blake and Hoffman wave them off and mention that this is now a hostage situation where they will be running the lead on that. And of course, one of our favorite characters, Ben, arrives on the scene and immediately tries to start poking for information.
I loved how this showed how good Ben is at his job.
The mental tit for tat that Ben and Blake and Hoffman have is just so fun to watch.
Well, yeah, I mean, the way he starts asking questions in such a way that Ben knows the answer, like the cop's name, Sullivan, but gets them to confirm it. Whereas Hoffman did, and Blake was like, you know, why are you talking to him?
What are you doing?
Yeah. You know, and just shows that, like, he knows. And he even made that comment, like, you know, how do you know that? He's like, oh, I mean, he said, I've been doing it a long time, but also I'm not sure he fully knew until they said that.
He gave them just enough rope to hang themselves.
Yeah. And so I really enjoyed not just that moment, but every time we saw Ben, you had a little something like that. Well, you got to see, you know, in the other ones, you know, you get this sense that he loves the news and his job, but here you really get to see it.
Yeah, he's clearly in his element. Like, there's something so satisfying about watching people in their elements because they almost feel untouchable.
Yes. Well, and then there was a moment from Blake's side that I thought was just really unsettling, because, you know, he says to him, I can't promise you don't get caught up. And in some ways, it's, I think from Ben's side, you're just kind of taking it in the sense of like, you're annoying me and I'm saying this. But from what we know, That could mean Ben's dead, intentionally so.
Well, I mean, that's what I wrote down is like, you won't get this on your first watch, but I love this exchange you're describing, because Ben says, I'll keep my head down, and Blake very skeptically writes him off like, yeah, you do that. And I mean, you're framing this as like, we, the audience in this first watch, are gonna rightfully be worried for Ben, but in the second watch, we obviously know Blake doesn't know what's coming, and it kind of has a satisfying feel of like a comeuppance coming.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Foreshadow.
Actually, I have a question about that, because I think, and this, we may have to edit this out, but last episode, I think, or maybe the episode before, you talked about foreshadowing your end of the podcast question. Do you not like the term foreshadowing?
No. I think it's fine. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Because you said something along the lines like, I almost said foreshadowing.
No, I have nothing to do with my like or dislike of foreshadowing. You know, I think I like it when creators use foreshadowing in a really clever way. You know, like
there's a skill to it.
Yeah, because there's times where it's just like, you know, it's coming. You know, and they spell it out for you. And then there's times where it's really subtle.
It rewards the repeat watches.
Yes. Well,
so after that exchange,
I was going to say on that line, for example, to jump into MCU proper for a second, Black Panther has this line about something to the effect that if when Thanos comes here to Wakanda, all that he'll have is dust and blood. And that was a really subtle and clever foreshadowing that no one saw coming until a rewatch.
No one had any idea the scale of the emotional punch we were about to get.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good call to the MCU proper. I like that. So after we get that scene with Ben, Blake, and Hoffman, we are back in the car with Wesley and Fisk, and we get to hear Blake relaying the information to Wesley, which Wesley in return relays to Fisk, telling about the man in the black mask who has assaulted the police officer and is now holding him hostage, and they're waiting for Fisk to give them permission to take the building so that they can wrap this up. And before this scene ends, Wesley does take the time to mention Ben by name, and both Fisk and Wesley seem very concerned about the fact that Ben is on the case.
Yes. I really like that. Just kind of reinforce the waves Ben is making, you know, and it was a clever way of showing the reach of Fisk, of how, he basically said, fine, I'll call the rest of my media in.
Like, I think he even specifically has a line to the effect of, what was it? Problems are just opportunities that haven't presented themselves yet.
Yes.
Like he doesn't even flinch. Like I think I set up the scene wrong by saying that Fisk is worried, but it was Wesley that was worried, and it gets to show off Fisk's competency. But one of the notes that I wrote down is that we've seen Wesley be this, even-keeled person throughout.
Mm-hmm.
He has been the one always assuring Fisk everything's under control, don't worry about it. But I have never been more afraid for Ben than when Wesley was worried about him.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And I don't remember how things play off for Ben, but I legitimately got scared in this episode.
Well, we'll find out at the end if he makes it through this episode.
Yeah. Can we award 2 MVPs? I know we've been joking around about doing this. Can we give it to both Wesley and Ben this episode?
Sure. Why not? Ben for sure. I don't know. I might have to be convinced on the Wesley for this episode. And only because we see so little of Wesley.
True.
I might, if I had to do co-MVPs, I might throw it to Vladimir, but
yeah, I think that might be the more obvious choice. Yeah.
I think from here we move on. Daredevil and Vladimir. Question: as I go to set this up, I bounce back and forth because as so far when he's the man in the mask, he's the man in the mask. He hasn't taken the Daredevil moniker. Is that okay? Can I say Daredevil? Are we good?
I've definitely said Daredevil before. It's up to you. It's weird the way that we distinguish that. Because nobody sees this that listens to the podcast, but the notes that I write for each episode, you can tell the difference of how I'm feeling by whether I say Matt, Daredevil, or Man in Black Mask.
Yeah.
So I get that apprehension to not call him Daredevil yet, but I think it's fine.
At this point, we're back with Daredevil and Vladimir. Matt is cuffing Officer Sullivan, bouncing back and forth. Matt is cuffing off Officer Sullivan to the pole after subduing him, and then begins his interrogation of Vladimir, trying to get information on Fisk, while Vladimir starts to poke holes in what Daredevil believes he's doing.
Right. And to me, this is where that debate of the no death code gets hairy, because we've been talking about it like it's this black and white scenario, but Vladimir brings up a good point that, if we take Matt at his word, he reveals that if he didn't need Vladimir, he would have let him die. And much like we discussed with Matt's responsibility on the death of Simon, here we get to run a scenario with whether or not it would be in the wrong for Matt to allow Vladimir to die. Right.
Well, my note here says Daredevil has a very narrow interpretation on his no death code. Yeah, I mean, you're right. You asked that about there, and go on first. Okay, let's put it this way: Matt for the show is Catholic, right? And they really try to show, and I've mentioned this before, his Catholicity. Every Sunday, part of the Mass, we say the penitential rite, and a part of that we say, "Forgive me for what I've done and for what I failed to do." Matt knows this, right? And he's really, Matt's well educated. He's a lawyer, went to Columbia, right? So he's an intelligent person. And so he knows, I feel, that he's playing fast and loose with this idea of, well, here's what my intentions are, but this is my action. Because there's a lot of this where you could say, no, you were there, you're in action. Forgive me for what I failed to do. It would have been the cause of Vladimir's death. And it's on you.
And to kind of play off what you were saying about forgive me for what I've done and what I've failed to do, we see how Matt warps that in episode 1, because he instead says, forgive me for what I'm about to do. And the father pushes back on, that's not how this works. So I think you're right in that Matt knows that he's playing loose, but it's almost like he's been trying to justify it, at least up until this point.
Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, to be careful on how far I want to go down this road. Well, at its core, when people make moral choices, there's intentions, right? What you want to have happened, and there's the action itself. And if Matt's action, right, is I'm only saving him because I need him, right? Then that intent, when you don't save him because you need him, is an intention for him to die. If you follow me kind of down that path. And so that's why I say it's like he's really playing fast and loose with what he considers not killing and killing. Beyond just, we talked about throwing someone over, but when you actually really start to think about it in those terms, then man, he has a lot of work to do to live up to that phrase, I don't kill people.
Yeah. It's hard. Like I said, this is definitely where it starts to get hairy, trying to track how he's interpreting that code. I think another thing I like about this scene is that, I said it before, but just kind of to reiterate it here, we're seeing this fight over ideologies, and we obviously know who wins by this episode's end, but the way Vladimir is implanting that idea in his head that they're no different it's such great drama, because we've already seen that Matt has this temptation to let the devil out, and now there's going to be this nagging question in his head, is Vladimir right? Are they no different than each other? And that it's just a matter of time before Matt starts killing. Does Matt have to compromise what he believes to ultimately take down Fisk?
Right. And I think that's the largest theme of this whole episode, at least for the Daredevil, or not this episode, the whole series for this Daredevil character, that what is the right way to do justice? If I step outside of this for a second and think about, Batman clearly has the no kill rule, right? And one of the clever things about Christopher Nolan's, I don't want to say the trilogy, I'm just going to go with The Dark Knight, because if you do it as a trilogy, that you kind of start having problems. They did a really good job of making Batman, Bruce Wayne have choices and choose a way to not kill. And clearly Daredevil's choices here doesn't avoid killing, or at least the possibility that the person dies. And so that's something that we're seeing him work out and struggle with. But on a larger scale, like, you kind of get that conscience of shows like this. You know, I mean, the end of Man of Steel, one of the big complaints was the end scene and the destruction of all the innocents and all of that. And the next big Marvel movie, I think, that came out was Age of Ultron, and they spent a good portion of that third act. Everybody gets out of Sokovia, right? Collateral Damage was a focal point of Civil War, you know?
Right.
And so I think also us just talking about it and no longer just accepting, you know, because I remember watching this the first time in the Human Shield. It was just like, it's Daredevil. I'm going to eat my popcorn and go, you know, and enjoy it. But I think that this rewatch and the way we were talking about this also shows how things have changed and what we expect out of shows like this.
The bar has definitely been raised, and we're seeing them try to reach for it. I will say this is just a small note. I don't know if we can dig too much into it, but I love this continuing thread of various people telling Matt that he really doesn't know anything. Because we had Blake in the previous episode being like, "Oh man, you really are dumb, aren't you?" And then when he was talking to Vladimir and trying to piece together what he knew, Vladimir insinuates again that, "Man, you're just really kind of fishing for straws here."
Well, you know, he insults all of us, right? He lists, he says it's Al Capone's accountant. And he's like, American schools no better than Russian schools.
I said one note, but actually I got a question here for you, because I know how I felt. Did you start to believe that Vladimir was changing here?
Yes.
When he started to offer up?
Yes.
I did too. I don't know. Like, I felt like I got played as well, because obviously the scene ends with Vladimir faking out Matt, and they get into a tussle and end up falling through to the bottom basement.
Right. Well, and we know from previous episodes, Vladimir is not just a fighter, but a survivor, you know? And I think if he would have turned here, like, while I did get that feeling, I think if he would have just turned right here, that probably would have been too quick for this character.
Yeah. It just shows great writing on their part that, like, logically we can say we know that can't happen. Like you said, it's too quick, but emotionally we felt like it could happen. And that's just good writing and then good acting on both Charlie Cox and Vladimir's actors,
right,
who I do not have.
1 second. 1 second. 3.
Hey, with editing magic, it can be 1 second.
It's going to have to be editing magic. Oh, there it is. Really? Nikoleff. Nikolai. Go with that.
Nikolai. Great acting on Charlie Cox and Nikolai's part. So after their tussle finds them unconscious at the bottom of the basement, we get to a new scene where the media has arrived on the scene and Ben watches on. Blake arrives to kind of tease Ben about how he's old and irrelevant, and that the TV is taking over the written news. And then we switch to the hospital scene where Karen's trying to reach Matt, and despite Foggy being concerned himself, he's doing the best he can to persuade Karen that everything's okay. But as the scene ends, we obviously get to see that Foggy is just as concerned as Karen.
Yes. Okay, one small note as the media shows up, right? Okay, 2 small notes. One, I mentioned in the first time we see Ben, and you kind of start to have that play on print media is dying out, and they kind of bring that back up. But the other thing is, what I just found funny was, so the camera comes over and you see the reporter from behind standing there. You see the person, the cameraman, you know, but then next to him you see somebody with a boom mic, which doesn't make sense because it's a TV reporter and she holds her own mic. And I'm just like, what are you doing? So,
and that's so weird that that's something that they would mess up, because that's obviously media production,
right?
And this is a media production team. So why does that get overlooked?
I don't know. It is probably, you know, you're just not expecting somebody to point that out. Like, it very well could have just been the actual boom mic operator for the show capturing her words for when you see her on TV, like when Fisk is watching, and that's what's going on, and that's who it is, and he gets to say, "Hey, Mom, look, I'm in the show." Like, it very well could have been that.
Okay, that makes a little bit more sense.
I used to work at a TV station, and we never used a boom mic, and the reporters had their own microphone, and and so I looked at it and I was just like, what?
That's why I'm so glad that you're doing this podcast, because you bring a lot of the technical side of the filmmaking to this, and that makes me happy. I never would have caught that. Going back to this idea of Blake teasing Ben about his irrelevancy, we've seen that Ben has constantly been surrounded by this notion of creeping irrelevancy, with the blog conversation, the conversation with his informant and their reverence for the old days, and now this. But I don't know, there was something about it that felt out of place this time around. Like, I get what they're going for, that, when Blake says that's you not mattering anymore. But even back in, what was this, 2013, 2014? 2015, I think you could make the same argument for traditional television media being irrelevant too. And so it felt weird that they were trying to take that shot with this example.
Yeah, well, many times I'm like, I don't have TV, and people get shocked and they're like, how do you not have a TV? I'm like, no, I have a TV. I don't pay for TV. I do streaming. I mean, you have that term, cut the cord, right? And go to streaming services. Mm-hmm. We did that in 2010.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's way ahead of the curve.
It was. And so, yeah, we started doing just streaming in 2010. And I remember talking some of my friends into doing the same. So that it's a little dated, but okay.
I mean, I guess the way you could kind of spin it, and it kind of tries to bring into what you mentioned, where if, go back to that scene where Ben and his editor are having the conversation about blogs. If this show came out today, it wouldn't be about blogs, it'd be about fake news. So I guess you could kind of spin it with that lens, where Blake knowing, or probably knowing, that Fisk controls the media, it's Blake detailing that the truth doesn't matter. The truth is only what the people in power dictate it is.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Which that feels like a read that is more current, but I don't know if that's exactly what they were going for at the time.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I do think it works, knowing how much Fisk owns. And owns might not be the right word, but has in his pocket. Now, I do want to say, you mentioned about Foggy and Karen as part of your setup, right?
Right.
And we kind of there. I have a note that just says, in all caps, why, with 3 question mark, those two work so well together. And I know it's something we talked about last episode, but it's still just banging my head against the wall of like, this is the direction you're writing and your chemistry's taking you. Anyways, why not develop that? But okay. I guess that's why I'm doing a podcast about it and not making it, but okay.
I don't know. The only note that I have regarding this is, I mean, Foggy's a good friend. I basically said it in the setup, but, the way the scene ends, where Karen walks away and then the look of concern shows on Foggy's face and he immediately tries to call Matt himself, he's worried, but he places Karen before himself and not letting that worry show. And then he even tries to place Matt before himself by saying, I'll go look for him, even though that he's injured. It's a good character moment for Foggy.
It is. And we mentioned this last episode. They do a lot with very little screen time for Foggy. Mm-hmm. So at this point, I think we come back to Matt and Vladimir, and this is after they've fallen through the floors, and we continue some of their conversation, but only after Matt brings Vladimir back with CPR.
I'm a little rusty on my story circle here, the hero's journey, but the fact that Vladimir and Matt end up in the bottom of the warehouse is so narratively satisfying to me, because I'm going to butcher this, but I'm going to try and do my best to kind of detail why I love this scene in this episode much based on what I know of the story circle. is, the story circle is all about this circular process that stories go through where, characters undergo a series of trials before getting what they want and are able to return back the other side having changed. At the bottom of the circle, like if you draw a circle at the top, it starts with a character at a starting position. They want something, enter an unfamiliar territory, adapt to it, get what they want, and then return having changed. Is that making sense before I continue?
It does. It basically where this comes from is you have a psychologist by the name of Carl Jung, and he has what's called Jungian archetypes. You're looking at the basics like the king role, the hero / warrior role. There's a magician. There's a lover archetype. And then you get a guy by the name of Joseph Campbell who comes along and basically the hero's journey in his study of comparative religions and comparative myths, takes those archetypes, finds them across these cultures, and comes up with his hero's journey. And then, and then
to take that even a step.
I was just going to say, and then like you get creators using that. And that's why some of these stories that resonate with us so well is, for Carl Jung, if I'm getting this right, it's something that's within all of us. Like those roles are innately within us and we can recognize them when we see them. And so when you have good stories that tap into that and those archetypes, we identify and are able to get sucked in.
And so because you were detailing, was it Carl Jung to
Joseph Campbell?
I just lost Joseph Campbell. And then to take that a step further, the way that I was kind of brought into it was that, Dan Harmon even took that and simplified it a little bit more, which is where I picked up on it. And that's where like I'm getting the very simplified version of it. Like I haven't delved into it as deep as, say, going to the Joseph Campbell version. But so when you get to the bottom of the circle, the two detailed points you have is getting what the character wants and paying a price for it. Matt almost got what he wanted out of Vladimir, but he pays the price by letting his guard down, and now they find themselves alone and in further danger. Here they have nothing but to contend with their ideologies they represent, and we get to see who they really are. So, clearly Vladimir isn't interested in helping Matt, but Matt still revives him back to life. And, Matt couldn't let him die. Like he had every opportunity here to do it, and he still couldn't.
Right. Well, and Matt does play this off in the sense of use, because Vladimir says, you just couldn't do it, could you? You just couldn't let me die. And he says, I think he even outright says, I might have written it down, he says, I'm not done with you. Now, I will say this. No, go ahead and make your point.
No, I was just going to say that, Vladimir gets to learn firsthand just how strong Matt's convictions are. And I just love this scene a lot because of the way that we're trailing, or at least the way that I got to track it through the story circle.
Yeah. And as you were talking about that, one of the things I was looking at is that's where we at on our notes. That is about scene 13. Okay. Okay. So it's a little bit past midway, when thinking about it in those terms. Honestly, I kind of got distracted just a little bit by the CPR.
Oh yeah?
But yeah, just because. Okay, so CPR, right? If I'm getting this right, CPR, what you're doing is you're pumping, the heart's not pumping, and so you're pumping blood through the body, and so you're forcing the heart to do it. And that's getting blood to the organs, the brain, and things like that. So to stop and do the pounding, like it's not how hard you hit them is what like kickstarting the heart. And I just find it interesting how so many times movies go to that for that dramatic effect.
And it, I didn't pick up on that, but you detailing that, it's, again, I guess this is my phrase of the week, to have their cake and eat it too. They wanted to have that moment at the beginning where Claire calls out, like, it's not like how it is in the movies. And then they turn around and they have this scene, which has been obviously dramatized for the movies.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you got to do it. I mean, to push the heart, push through the sternum and all that stuff. I mean, you're not doing it softly. But like you have to have what he begins with, that pace. And so to stop and do that, when you see that in movies, it's just that dramatic effect. And people keep going back to it, so clearly it works.
It becomes part of the visual vocabulary of cinema.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So after Matt brings Vladimir to life, we get a new scene where we see that communication is being established between Matt and Fisk via walkie-talkie. Matt doing his best to locate an exit from the warehouse, and he tries to lift a grate that he can't lift up on his own. And while doing so, we see that Fisk interrupts on the walkie-talkie, and we get our first interaction between Fisk and Matt.
My first note actually was when this came out originally, people were wondering about that sniper. Was that sniper a reference or a nod to Bullseye, which is a classic Daredevil villain? And that was the first thing I wrote, actually, about this scene. Now, I do like, and I don't know if it's just the format, because we talked about the restraint of having buildup of seeing Fisk, and it feels very quick that the two of them are encountering each other. But this is episode 6, and there's 12, 13 episodes. So maybe it's not as quick as it feels to me to have them interact. But I do like that they have that confrontation in the middle of an episode where Matt's wrestling with, the person he's becoming.
And it's the stage that they've set for this to happen, continuing that line of thought, about our characters being at the lowest point of their journey. It's great that this is the first time they're interacting, because, we see just how control Fisk has over the situation. And then we have Matt, who's literally down in a basement with a man he despises and no way out. He has every reason to give up, especially when Fisk offers him an out, but Matt will not budge. It's just strong character representation for both of them.
Well, yeah. And you mentioned how much control Fisk has. And I'm not trying to jump too far ahead on this scene, but on that thought of control, when they give the go for that sniper to take the shot, it wasn't just 2 random police officers. Like one officer, we don't know who it was, but they took out Blake. And you have to think that was intentional after the mess up with the phone in terms of giving it up, right? Or
right.
being careless.
Almost definitely.
Or being careless, I think was the word they used.
Yeah, because Fisk says, we'll deal with Blake later. And I mean, that from that moment forward, he was a dead man. Right.
I liked how they gave it a hint that it might be at Ben. Because I mean, that crosshairs was on Ben. It kind of, then they cut away and you hear the shot, and Blake's the one that goes down. And clearly talking about, again, that control on Fisk's part, he didn't go shooting up the crowd. It was 2 officers shot.
Right. Because, I mean, we've seen, up to this point how Fisk has this plan of turning the media on Matt. Like he's trying to get everybody to, we have Claire where she said that the man in the black mask was getting known, and he was being known for doing these good deeds. And here we're seeing Fisk take that image and destroy it. Matt kind of had this rebuttal where he was like, even if I fail, people will see what I was trying to do and take up from where I left off. And Fisk immediately squashes that idea.
Yes. Like, I really found it interesting because he said, the issue with people like you is your ideology. But very quickly, I think Fisk kind of showed that your ideology, because I don't agree with Fisk, but I think he very effectively, though, kind of made Matt feel like he was fighting for nothing. I mean, because even he mentioned, we're doing the same thing, trying to help the city. I'm just trying to do it. And I love the line. He didn't say on a bigger scale. He said on a scale that matters.
Yes. He's so dismissive of Matt. He's like continuously undercutting him. Like you said, making him feel like what he does doesn't matter. And one way that we see it is because Matt says, I'm going to make you pay for what you've done. And without missing a beat, Fisk replies, no, you are not. I mean, Fisk feels invincible. He is untouchable. And then another thing that I want to point out while we're just discussing the way that Fisk continuously undercuts Matt, one of the things that I found really illuminating, and it was because of the way that you track this, Fisk said, you're a child playing at being a hero. I like this line specifically because you referenced, Fisk's childhood was brought up so many times in previous episodes, and we even saw the way that he got hurt when Vanessa poked fun of his childlike dessert.
Yeah.
So it's cool that we know that that's a point of contingency for Fisk, and to get to watch him try and throw that rebuttal at Matt just shows a lot of insight for who Fisk is as a person.
Yes, that's a really good. I really like that insight. I really, trying to take basically his own insecurities and throw it at someone else.
Yeah.
Well, and I like also here there was two lines. Matt tries to gain the upper hand, where you don't want Vladimir dead, something along those lines, because what he might tell me, and Fisk says like, so clearly he hasn't told you anything, and and then we see Matt kind of that frustration showing or not being able to take the upper hand there with that line. What was the other one? There was one other one. Oh, when he talked about framing him, and Matt was like, laughed and was like, do you really think people are going to believe that? And Fisk very clearly, yes, I do. And I don't blame him.
You dunce. Like he's almost like a step away from just being like, yeah, do you not see this?
You know what? And I praised Matt for being intelligent earlier in this episode. I need to rethink that.
Oh man. But no, and to me, honestly, this is where I took my most notes in this scene. This is one of the best scenes, I think. We've been tracking how much Matt and Fisk are alike, and now we get to see it plainly stated from Fisk himself. Fisk draws so many comparisons between the two of them, but he makes sure to hammer home the point that Fisk is a realist and can make, like you said, actual change. I also like that in this moment, Fisk states not everyone deserves a happy ending, and when he says that, the camera lingers on Vladimir. Fisk is right. There's no scenario in which Vladimir deserves a happy ending, and it's almost like we're trying to be persuaded into this belief that, okay, Fisk is right.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. This other point that I have, this is something, because we finally brought up our spoiler policy last week.
Yeah. We're spoiler zone, by the way. Okay, go ahead.
We're definitely spoiler zone. How do we feel about potential rumors as spoilers? Because I have a way to connect this to the MCU proper.
Let's hear it.
And if you decide that, like, okay, maybe we shouldn't do that, we can edit it out, but I'll just go for it. If the rumors are true and Spider-Man 3 is going to feature Daredevil being Peter Parker's lawyer, it's really cool that we get to see Matt learning firsthand what it's like to have a city pitted against you. If they bring him in to defend Peter Parker against Mysterio's death, then who better than Matt?
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Oh my God. See, and they'll never know because of the magic of editing. No, I think that's an excellent point. Like, I really, really hope that's the way they go. I understand that might not be the case.
Right.
But that's what I'm pulling for. I mean, the rumors are out there, but I think that would be a really nice tie-in, because even if he doesn't suit up as Daredevil and it's just as Matt Murdock, you could have some acting choices, some writing choices that like you said, he understands exactly as you said, the city turned against them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fantastic.
And you kind of just laid the tracks here for me. We obviously, because we're doing this podcast, if they go this route, we will be rewarded because we have seen Daredevil.
Yes.
But if you said with the writing choices, if they only bring him in as the lawyer, it's almost like a reset for establishing him in the universe, and they can not necessarily create a new origin, but if the audience hasn't seen Daredevil yet, this is their chance to learn about him as like a quick catch up in a way.
Oh yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So this paves a direct tie-in into the MCU proper.
Right. Well, and it's the way we've started to grow. And it's the way we've started to grow accustomed to how they bring characters in with Black Panther.
Mm-hmm.
Some
Peter Parker himself.
Yeah. And I think it would be a nice way to introduce that character. I mean, as we do this, especially with all the Fox properties they got, not to drift too far from the episode, but that's, I think, the direction they're going in terms of introducing the X-Men and all those other things slowly, right? And all these wealth of characters they have. Maybe Deadpool. If Deadpool does show up, it'll have to be something along those lines, I would imagine. And it was an excellent way to get Murdoch in there.
Yeah.
Even if they don't do even if they do a recast, it's a good way to do it that way, but just the Matt Murdock.
It's a nice on-ramp.
Mm-hmm.
So after the scene where we have our back and forth with Fisk and Matt, we get to see the immediate effects of Fisk's framing of the man in the black mask, with everybody in the hospital seeing the news reports revealing that the man in the black mask is responsible for the explosions. We get to see how Claire, Foggy, and Karen react to this news. So we just had this conversation about Matt saying, do you really believe the people are going to believe you that I did this? And Fisk is like, yeah. We get to see the immediate aftermath where it switches to Karen, Foggy, and Claire having to question the man in the black mask, lends credence to Fisk's threat. Obviously Claire knows who Matt is and what he's doing, but the way she looks at that TV, you can almost see a part of her that's hoping, I hope this isn't Matt's doing. And then with Karen is quickly to point out, like, hey, that's the man who saved me. I don't think he would do this. And then finally, and I think the one that hurts the most of all, is Foggy just straight up says, you can't trust a person in a mask. And these are the people who are closest to Matt. And to see that even they are kind of shaken up a little bit by this.
Oh, yeah.
It just goes to show how much trouble Matt is in.
Oh, yeah. I think that's a good note on Foggy. Clearly he doesn't know, but to say that as generalized as it did, just a blanket statement. He wears a mask, you can't trust him. But the next scene, starts with Claire calling Matt. When you consider what they've been through together, the read I got out of that was she thought it happened. If that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like it was believable enough that Claire had to make the call and check.
To keep playing off this conversation between them, Matt admitting to Claire that she was right about him being close to someone he hates shows just how much Vladimir got to him. Matt has had serious doubts casted on his ability to accomplish his goals without compromising his ideology. And it's just such a crushing blow to see him here at his lowest and basically be like, you're right, I'm sorry, take care. Because he doesn't think he's getting out of this.
No, that was the big takeaway here for me, is in that exchange that Matt thought he was done. Mm-hmm. Which goes back to what we mentioned about Fisk and that control. And I think something I mentioned about that feeling they gave, that they showed of just everything coming down on him. Or just that feeling of being surrounded, and it was just one after another, layer after layer of you are truly trapped.
And, even if it's not explicitly stated, I think Vladimir being here to witness this conversation and see how much Matt is willing to give up to try to accomplish his goals, even though we're seeing Matt falter, this, we see that this is the moment that Vladimir switches because he gets up and helps Matt lift the grate. And even if Vladimir doesn't believe it's possible to finish all this without death, Matt has won this debate between Fisk ideology and Matt's ideology by being able to convince Vladimir to kind of move more closer to doing the right thing.
Right. And I think it took that phone conversation, and in particular, like you said, Vladimir hearing that phone conversation to be convinced that Daredevil is genuine. Or, well, let's say Daredevil's attempting to be genuine, because as you track through this conversation, it's one of those things where maybe Vladimir, I don't know, does he feel sorry for him? We'll talk about this as we go through, but it almost wonders, like, because he says, like, are you going to do in the end what you must do? Right. So it does make me wonder, is it just like, well, I kind of feel sorry for you that you think you can do this your way.
It's almost like he has gained his respect.
Yes.
He doesn't believe that Matt's right. He thinks Matt's gonna die.
Right.
But he respects the conviction.
Yes.
Because we didn't touch on it, but in this previous scene, Fisk is offering up to Matt, like, hey, kill the Russian and I'll let you go. And immediately the first thing Vladimir does is he starts reaching for a wooden spike, and without missing a beat, Matt is able to squash his arm and kick it away. But I think here Vladimir sees that was never an option for Matt. He was never going to kill him. And right. So I think it is a combination of that, the phone call, and he now has Matt's respect.
Yeah. Well,
or vice versa.
Well, no,
he respects Matt.
And I like the way you mentioned that and use the word convictions. Because, I mean, if you take Vladimir's story as Vladimir's story is coming to an end, from when we first really dive into Vladimir, I know we see him with the group, but I'm thinking back when we see him in Russia, you know, and he broke a rib off of the dead person. While we might not like his methods and thinks he's crazy, he is very much a person of his convictions, you know, and I think in that sense, he recognizes that in Matt.
So with their new joined forces, they are able to lift the grate and carry on. Meanwhile, the SWAT team is infiltrating the warehouse, and they quickly kill Officer Sullivan, the police officer that Matt tied up earlier. They're trying to catch up to Vladimir and Matt, who have lowered themselves in the sewer and begin their escape. Vladimir is so severely injured that he can barely hold himself up under his own weight, and they reach this point where they are cornered by the SWAT team, and after Matt does away with them, Vladimir has found himself in possession of a weapon, and the question becomes, what does Vladimir do moving forward? Right. If he will use that against Matt or not.
Yes. First thing I want to say is I felt so bad for Sullivan in that moment. You know, well, because it's, to me, what made it just so heartbreaking was he actually made the call in, Sullivan's dead, before he killed him. You know, like if you reverse that, he goes in and kills him and then says Sullivan's dead. It's kind of shocking, but you know that Fisk has the police on the payroll. But for him to hear it, the death sentence, before it happens, just to me, that was just really heartbreaking moment. Right,
because you can see the pain in his eyes. He's like, he's putting it together. And what's hard is he did the right thing.
Yeah.
Like in the perfect world, he did the right thing, but because he didn't trust Matt, it's just it hurts. Like you said, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah. And he didn't have good reason to trust Matt either. And so, yeah.
The note that I have here is Vladimir could never be redeemed. Like, he's done way too many heinous things for us to ever root for him. But it speaks volume of Matt's character that he was able to inspire Vladimir into sacrificing himself for the greater good. Because as I set up in the scene, after Matt takes out the SWAT team, Vladimir picks up one of the machine guns that falls to the ground, and the scene is framed as though he's going to turn on Matt. But in a turn of events, we see Vladimir say, I will stay and buy you time. You keep going.
Right.
You know, there's an element of revenge for Anatoly and sticking it to Fisk, but Vladimir made a choice to not be self-serving and shoot Matt, and he's been won over. And, you know, Matt won that debate.
And also, the ultimate reward, he gave up the name. Not only did he give up the name, he said, you know, here's the name you think you want, Leland Owsley. And I liked that little extra, and not even a jab, just this realization of, on Vladimir's part, of, I'm going to help you and reward you, but this isn't, you're still kind of barking up the wrong tree. Yeah, so it was a nice way to end Vladimir's, you brought it up. I mean, if Vladimir had his own little story circle, it was a nice way to end it, you know. Well, because he had that line, you know, that says, the moment you put on the mask, you got into a cage with animals. Animals don't stop fighting. Can you do, and I've already alluded to this, can you do what you know you must do? I really liked how they brought his thing to a conclusion.
And to me, this final conversation that you're talking about, you know, the moment you put on the mask, you got in a cage with animals. Animals don't stop fighting until one is dead. You know, this final conversation brings the title of the episode into focus. It's called Condemned. You know, Vladimir has basically condemned Matt with this burden, and we can see the weight it has on him as he walks away in rage in that final shot. You know, we talked about the story circle and how, you know, it tells a complete story, but whenever you're telling a serialized story like Daredevil, you can't obviously end on a complete story because we have more episodes to go to. And I love that they were able to tell their story arc in this episode and still propel us forward, because this conversation is going to propel so much of that underlying drama moving forward. Can Matt do what he needs to do without compromising his morals?
Right. And I guess that's going to be the thing we keep tabs on the rest of the way through. Like, if the answer to the question is yes, you have a no-kill code, then we're gonna track it through. I have another point to make, but I want to. I don't want to distract from I feel like the deeper conversation. So,
well, the only other, I have my final wrap up thoughts. So
okay.
If you want to bring it in, go ahead.
Okay. So how did Vladimir not get shot? like Daredevil. I mean, Daredevil is doing his thing, right? And he disarms them and whatnot. But and again, and it was for effect, right? And in terms of action sequence for us to be able to see what's going on, and you get the gunshot, and it brings the tension. So like, I get why they did it, and I don't have a problem with why they're doing it. But they're in such a confined space, and Matt throws Vladimir off to the side, and that thing is shooting everywhere. Like, how did Vladimir not get shot again?
I guess the universe already felt bad enough for him. He took so much damage this episode. They just let him slide.
Okay, that's I'll go with that. Like, that was one of my first notes, and the ending note was like, did he just really open that door with a kick? Like,
yeah, I thought that was so out of place.
For especially, I mean, you have to accept that he's built. It works out, and we even had a workout scene, and you're like pushing on the door and it's not coming open, and so that little quick jump kick to knock off what I assume is a padlock. I'm not going to think too much more about it, but okay.
Well, I'll kind of go on this limb with you. I think there was as much as I love this episode, there was a lot of little moments that just felt weird. Like the first one I remember is the first time that Matt lights up that flare. He kind of like misses, I think, and he kind of looks dopey there with his mask on.
Well, he's blind. He's blind, Trey.
Well, okay. Well, now I feel horrible. Well, and then the next one is whenever he disarms Sullivan, there was something weird about the way he kind of like came from off screen. Yeah. And I think it was because we're so used to him being so dramatic and doing flips. Right. But Sullivan was like so not a threat that he just comes off, like, okay, this isn't worth my time.
Okay, show off. Okay.
And then the last one that kind of felt out of place is, I don't know if you caught this, whenever he was trying to lift the grate, obviously there's a lot of stress that goes into trying to lift something heavy, but there was one particular effort where he just made the weirdest noise, and I kind of laughed. Like, it was just like this weird grunt, and I was like, okay, I guess they're going to leave that in.
Well, in fairness, if he's able to just take a moment of silence and scan the room and find out the flares are there, you'd think he'd catch it on the first time.
Yeah. I'm glad we could go these little tangents. But I mean, I guess I could just kind of wrap it up. Overall, this episode is easily my favorite of the season so far. I was genuinely excited throughout, and I love the simplicity of its narrative. Matt needs to escape with Vladimir to get information. That's simple, but the way they use that story to really examine this debate between Fisk and Matt is beautiful. And, I'm also a sucker for like characters trapped in situations where enemies have to work together. It was kind of reminiscent of like 310 to Yuma. That kind of dynamic between characters being thrusted into a situation together.
Right. Well, coming off last episode, what I really liked about this one, and I think you mentioned it, so many characters, Claire comes to mind, but so many characters had to make a choice. It wasn't just them acting or one thing after another happening to just kind of that A-B pacing. Claire had to make a choice. Matt had to make the biggest choice in terms of ideology. Fisk's made some choices because clearly, right, these problems are really opportunities, right? So he is making adjustments to his plan that will take them down a particular path. So I really liked that aspect of this episode.
Yeah, very good episode for sure.
And actually, I did watch the open of the next one.
You did?
Yeah.
It's really going to be very hard for me once we get to season 2 to do this week by week. But yeah, that's going to do it for our discussion of season 1, episode 6, Condemned. But as you know, we can't leave this episode without our question of the week.
All right. And this week's question, Trey, if there was one thing, and I realized right as I said that it's not going to be one, but if there was one thing in the MCU that you could change or do differently, what would that be?
The first thing that came to mind was in Age of Ultron, we see the tensions get really high between Steve and Tony regarding like, Tony went behind their backs and built this AI and created Ultron, and they're having this terribly tense moment. And we know Civil War. Well, I don't know if we knew Civil War was coming, but now we know Civil War is coming. I really wish they would have left them at ends a little bit in Age of Ultron. If we could have had that tension still palpable from Age of Ultron into Civil War, I think it would have made Civil War that much more impactful.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be like, oh, they're bitter enemies by the end of Age of Ultron, but give that lingering narrative thread some service.
Right.
Like maybe like a conversation of like them like, hey, I'm still not happy that you did this kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I think that you're right. That in elements of like tension, that definitely would help create some. My first one is a conceptually. I wish they wouldn't have tried to get so big off the popularity of the Avengers. Well, because we're talking about this Daredevil, right? And it first came out, it's canon. And off of that, and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was supposed to be part of it, right? And then as you're going through these shows that are supposed to be part of the MCU proper, well, the fact that I even have to say MCU proper now, where those were supposed to be part of it and have those tie-ins, I felt like, looking back, off that popularity and success of Avengers, they started to blow up in that sense too fast. And it got me and a lot of people excited, and then it didn't pan out, with all these little side projects. So that would be something I'd want them to do differently. So that would be my number one.
And I can see that. I mean, we've talked about how I've only seen a set amount of the Netflix shows. The reason I quit, there's multiple reasons. Like my personal life got busy, but as we've talked about, we are such fans of the MCU that we make time for this stuff. But the moment that I knew the Netflix shows and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. wasn't canon anymore, I stopped prioritizing it. And so I feel that letdown of it, kind of the popularity moving past its side projects.
Oh yeah. Well, as we mentioned at the beginning of this episode here, right? Like we were going to start with Disney Plus shows and Black Widow, and world life situations didn't allow that to happen. So we went to this, but if we're honest, like we went to Daredevil season 1 because of that possibility of Daredevil showing up in the MCU proper, my feelings of recast aside, And so like that drove us to do this series over another one. Do you have another one?
Yeah, I have another one. So my second thing, I really wish they would have handled Hulk better in Infinity War and Endgame. Like I'm not mad with what we got, but it feels like there's a part of his story that's missing. Infinity War happens and we get this match with Thanos, and they use Thanos taking him out so quickly as a way to establish Thanos, but they really set Hulk back in a way that, like, you're waiting for this not necessarily revenge, but this chance to redeem himself. And it never really happens, in my opinion, because we get that time skip and we get Professor Hulk and we never get that middle ground.
Right.
And I really wish there would have been some better service to that.
Right. And in the least, I'd like to have seen the transition. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
Who knows? Maybe that's a 1-season Disney Plus show. And I'm not saying that in the sense of like, oh, that's in development or anything. I would like to see that transition, because building into Infinity War and Endgame, I know the talk coming out of Mark Ruffalo and others would be that Thor Ragnarok, Infinity War, and Endgame, if you follow just the Hulk, should feel like a solo movie.
Yep.
And I didn't get that because you don't get, he does a snap and brings everybody back, but it's not the same as this is the one that took you out. You never had another confrontation with Thanos, or
it's unresolved.
Right. And, or the final transformation into Professor Hulk.
Yeah.
Okay. My second one, Um, sorry, I'm giggling just a little bit. My second one.
That makes me excited.
My second one has to do with Winter Soldier.
Oh God.
Now, honestly, the one thing I was a little disappointed with in the Winter Soldier, and it's hard to find something to be disappointed with in that movie, was I just remember feeling like, man, you cut out so many possible storylines when you took down Hydra the way they did, or in S.H.I.E.L.D. the way they did, kind of a 2-for-1. Now, having said that, this isn't comics, so it can't go on forever.
Right.
And so that affords you to make those dramatic choices. But yeah, I just remember thinking, it was like, wow, that was quick, or as a turn. So yeah.
And I mean, it kind of leaves things in limbo for the S.H.I.E.L.D. side of the universe. 'Cause, we've had, like, obviously Nick Fury is a very important character, but what has he been doing ever since Winter Soldier?
Right.
And I think they're kind of like laying those track lines down, but it feels in limbo.
Well, I mean, after the Far From Home, has it been Nick Fury after Winter Soldier? Save that for another time.
You know what? I have a friend that I've been discussing this with, because she has been recently like doing a Marvel MCU rewatch, and I told her about that idea, and she has been keeping tabs on, for example, there's this theory that Fury has been replaced for a while, because I think in Captain Marvel he has this line where he's like, I don't like my sandwiches cut diagonally, or something like that.
Right, and then I go back to Age of Ultron. Yeah.
And then Age of Ultron, there's a sandwich cut diagonally. And so I told her that, and she has been keeping track. It's like, well, he can't be changed here because when he bled, it was red blood. And so like, we'll have to like bring her in to help us discuss that theory.
Yeah. We're going to have to do a rewatch of a particular, maybe it's Winter Soldier. And talk about Fury. Or is it furry?
Well, I don't know if no, God. I don't think we've talked about this on podcast, but like one of the things that we're doing, our Daredevil rewatch is only going to get us so far. And we kind of have this idea that once we finish Daredevil, that we kind of do a Black Widow rewatch where we watch the movies that she's specifically in to kind of help us get ready for the movie. I think it'd be cool to kind of do a Nick Fury rewatch at some point too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We have things in the works. We have some ideas.
Do you have any more things you'd like to see changed?
No, I'm going to stick with that. I think I'm just going to go with that for this episode. Yeah.
So if you'd like to chime in on things that you wish was done differently in MCU, or if you'd like to talk about Season 1, Episode 6, Condemned of Daredevil, you can reach us at MCU Need to Know on Twitter, or at MCU Need to Know on Instagram as well. Or if you'd like to write in an email, mcuneedtoknow@gmail.com.
And we'd really appreciate it if on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, you go and subscribe, download, give us a rating. We really appreciate the feedback. And of course, share with a friend.
And of course, if you want more MCU Need to Know goodness, you can always visit mcuneedtoknow.com so you can find out just where this podcast is available and leave us a comment there as well. And before we go, I'd like to give a special thanks to Nick Sandy for the use of our theme song, a rendition that he created on his own. And that'll do it. Yeah. Thank you all so much for listening.
Yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you, Trent.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Been going through and what kind of money projections, and then to take that and project out into other markets.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the big question has been, can Marvel movies restart the movie industry? And we talked a little bit about it before, how it's so unfair to the character Natasha and Black Widow, and obviously the actress Scarlet Witch, who's deserved a single movie for so long.
You said Scarlet Witch, not Scarlett Johansson.
Oops. All right, let me start that over. And we've talked about it before.
Her Scarlet Witch.
I know. That's how real the MCU is to me.
Okay.
Oh man. Okay.